Hello Apidays Helsinki. Google has years of investment in the AI and Gen AI ecosystem, as well as in protecting our own APIs and the APIs of our customers. I'm going to talk about the intersection of these topics and what you should be aware of as you plan ahead for your API security in this next wave of technology changes. So I'm Matt Feigal. I'm an Apigee partner engineer at Google. In my spare time, I like motorcycling, playing old-fashioned pen and paper role-playing games, and once in a while Google lets me do some creative storytelling about AI and how it's going to affect our lives, like the self-driving bike video. The flow I'm going to go through today is I'm going to first talk about what's really happening in the generative AI space and how it's going to impact and touch upon our API ecosystem. Then I'm going to talk about the new and changing risks that we're going to see because of this interesting wave of technology. And lastly, I'm going to go through some patterns of success that we see, that I see among Google and among our customers as they prepare for and adapt to this oncoming wave. So generative AI is a really interesting wave of technology that's coming, and it's going to really impact all of us. It's really, all users are going to have new tools. Everyone will have benefits. It's a little scary sometimes as well. But what we see, if you look at the top of this pyramid, experts are going to see a lot of toil reduction. People in the intermediate range of this pyramid will move up the pyramid. People who already know what they're doing are going to kind of bridge capabilities, increase their own competence level by getting support from these tools. And even novices, it's lowering the barrier to entry for novices. And I'm not just talking about people creating art by writing prompts or writing AI-driven books. I'm talking about business users writing and deploying applications by talking to an LLM. The pieces are all there, and they're already being wired together to make applications like this. And you can see some examples of those tools below. To get concrete, we already see a lot of use cases where generative AI is being used in the API ecosystem. There's a lot of excitement here around the developer space as a collaborator, helping you write your code, maybe taking away some of the tasks that you really don't enjoy, like writing documentation. Also already in the operations space, AIs perform faster than a human operator. So you expose your control plane to it, it learns the control plane, and eventually it starts, you train it to raise the right alerts to you. Maybe eventually you let it start flipping the switches. You also see this space where it becomes a super engineer for authoring services. 2 or 3 years from now, you might not even be writing in API proxies. You would expect your vendor to handle this, where you describe the API that you want, maybe by talking to it, and it generates and maybe even deploys an API proxy for you. And then the last part of this column is the actual generative AIs. This is a whole new ecosystem of chatbots and microservices based on large language models and things like that. Whether you're purchasing access to an existing LLM or fine-tuning one with your own context and prompts, and maybe 2 or 3 years from now, training your own, generative AI models are rapidly coming into use inside workflows, in customer-facing experiences. There's already a lot of tooling to help AIs reach out to other APIs. Now, we know that real API microservices environments have become incredibly complex, and there are infinite permutations of these architectures. For purposes of simplicity in this talk, I'm going to focus on a vastly simplified view of an API ecosystem using Google Cloud, as that's the platform I work with. There are a lot of possibilities, and in reality, there are hundreds of microservices and monoliths and sidecars and daemons running around here. But the overall flow should be familiar. You have a client, a load balancer, talking to an API gateway, in this case Apigee, which is then talking to business logic that's coded into functions in our cloud or your data stores, maybe reaching out to external software as a service or legacy on-premise systems. Where we're already seeing generative AI interacting with this landscape, now I'm going to call them the machines for this purpose. The machine callers, right? We have machine callers on the outside generating traffic. And with generative AI, maybe they're discovering your APIs and calling them without human prompting even. You've got the machine operators. This is where I mentioned they're it's monitoring your control plane, applying ML models, which might not be Gen AI, from their collective security or operations experience. That's how we apply these things at Google. Based on our experience with a wide range of attacks, we train models to operate in this machine operator space. And you then have the machine author, which is writing the business logic that and maybe eventually deploying. And I guarantee you the excited developers out there are already playing around with code and looking at how to write this code and build it and deploy it. And then finally, you have the machine as the microservice. This is the large language model or the generative AI. And here is a huge range of powerful business value powered to power applications that you write. And in reality, it's lots of these things. It's the experts and the intermediates and the novices are all starting to use these tools, and we expect an explosive growth, probably starting from the left-hand side here, the machine callers. There's going to be a lot more machine callers, but also on the inside, a lot new changes as the microservices, machine-authored microservices, and as these generative AIs start to become more embedded into workflows and things. And remember this, it's not just those AI callers, it's this huge network, hundreds or thousands of APIs and eventually Gen AIs interacting together. So what happens next because of this? What brings us to API security? Well, the machine-to-machine creation is already, and consumption is already a paradigm shift that's happening, and generative AI is just accelerating this fast-growing machine-to-machine interactions. And in this space, proper API management is really critical to success because we have really big growth opportunities here, both from the Gen AI perspective and what we can do with APIs, but also any technical debt that you're operating with today around governance or security or compliance becomes much bigger now because it will be much more exposed. At Google, we monitor our own APIs. We have a lot of practice monitoring the Google Maps API, which is, for instance, under constant, rather sophisticated attack from scrapers and things like that. And we also monitor our customers' API threats through Apigee. And we really see that already in 2022, from this Gartner report, there was this expectation that API abuse was going to become the most frequent way of attack vector. And this is really proving to be true. And last year, among our Apigee monitoring, we saw that 170% increase, so more than doubling increase in abusive API traffic. This was before the generative AI interactions really got even moving. And now some data about the business impact to you. Rather than the growth of the attacks overall, nearly every company saw an increase in the number of bot attacks. Half of them experienced API security incidents. And this created great costs and effort to recover. And actually even 77% of organizations delayed a rollout because of some API security incidents. And here we are all trying to move faster, promising our business stakeholders that we're going to have more agility from these APIs. They're going to have such great business value. And then security incidents are actually slowing us down and causing us problem. And also the space you have to secure here is pretty broad. Across the whole range of interactions that go into an API chain, there are a lot of different topics and a lot of different spaces that you need to take care of carefully. So that's all the standard security things you knew already. What are the risks that now emerge on the stage with Gen AI? I'm going to describe three personas of a Gen AI machine agent. There's the benevolent good bot. It's designed by a user who means well and it acts as intended. And then we're going to have the flawed bots. It's meant to be good. Its author wanted to do the right thing, but it has some flaws. It doesn't necessarily do what we expected. And then there's the malicious bot. It's built by a user intending harm, intending to attack. Back to this diagram, what kind of generative AIs do we see here? Well, of course, we are going to have a wonderful range of exciting, great machine callers and everything's going to go smoothly, and we're all going to get a lot more value and happiness. More realistically, there's some things already happening. We're going to get more of those machine callers, and we need to be ready for that. But also we're going to start to get the oops bots coming into the space, where a well-intentioned caller, I've written a chat bot to help my users order pizzas from the cheapest or best or nearest pizza place, and you're running a pizza service, and I have not configured my service fairly well, and maybe I order 500 pizzas from you, or maybe I order pizzas when the user didn't really want it, or maybe I order a ridiculous pizza that no one would ever eat and that you can't deliver. A lot of things that could go wrong here from my machine agent trying to use your service. And those oops bots aren't going to stop on the outside, because maybe that ops tool that you built yourself or that your vendor provided isn't really behaving as expected. Could happen. Maybe your happy developers and your brand new business users who are now quickly talking to LLMs and finding ways to deploy services so fast, and they may slip through your QA or test system. You can't keep up with them. Who would have ever thought to write a test that covered that? No human would ever have done that. So you didn't write a test for it, and it gets into production. This is a real thing that you're going to have to pay attention to. And finally, we're also going to see the bad actors. The external bad actors are becoming more sophisticated. And this leads to an increase in bad bots probing anything that you launch in more sophisticated ways, or at least in larger numbers. And one little final thought on this space: you also could have mistakes in your generative AI, in your machine as the microservice. You could also have anyone who reaches that and calling that could have bad intentions. So you need to have some protections there. And you could also have some malicious actors inside, or some supply chain attacks from outside that appear as internal attackers. Already we're seeing research in this space. The University of Cornwall published a paper about the ability to train a backdoor into a model that is really impossible to detect, because you aren't looking at code, you're looking at the vectors, and you're not going to be able to spot them. This could open a whole new space of supply chain attack. But there's good news. As always, IT and the security space is a place of learning and adaptation. And many of the practices that you know today are going to serve you really well here. So here are 5 common patterns that I'm seeing from Google and from partners and customers who are preparing and investing for this change. Your developers have a job to do. And unless it's to build and manage compliance and governance systems, all of this complicated stuff is like taxes. There's a lot of pressure for them to deliver, and they're going to love using LLMs to make their lives easier, to increase the rate of change of what they can produce. So you need to make the easiest path the safe one, so that they stay on that paved road. So think through how to build into this path the checks that you need, or at least provide some platform or policy level protection against things like misconfiguration, like poor authorization that might happen, or mistakes, like how do you watch for PII that's leaking out from these new tools that your business users and developers start launching like crazy. Defense in depth is always a good plan in this space. Let's take our initial cloud architecture, which is a bit generic, and look at where you need to add protection for defense in depth. Most of this should just be built into the substrate or easily configurable in whichever cloud you're using. But they're really valuable, and hopefully you already had them in place, but now this becomes table stakes in defending against all the oops bots and the evil bots. You've got your client-side recapture, the first things of, is this an actual user? Now here we get into a fun space where, the generative AI models are going to try to be outsmarting the CAPTCHAs, and luckily the vendors who run the CAPTCHA type tools are going to be keeping that up for you, so it's not your investment to make. You'll have your WAF and your load balancer, and these are going to catch many attacks, the massive DDoS attacks which might come through. But you can also expect more sophisticated attacks, even today, get through and might start to get more through more often as the machine callers get more creative and sophisticated. These are going to often be slower attacks, like scraping, targeted DDoS over certain areas, broken object level authentication that might be useful to exfiltrate data. And this is where you need, at your API gateway or your API management layer, you need to be well prepared for these sorts of things. How you would apply this to the generative AI space. On the incoming side, this is where you would apply your context engineering or your prompt engineering, for instance, to make sure that the model is answering in the right context or space that it should be. On the outgoing side, this is where you add your DLP or your intellectual property checks to make sure you're not leaking out anything you shouldn't be. It's also very good to put accuracy checks in here. You don't want to have your machine learning model hallucinate some insurance policy that doesn't exist that it's trying to sell to an end user, and also brand safety checks. Another one you need is when you have multi-tier applications, they have very different considerations around the speed of change. And you can't always control those cadences. So you want to employ a proxy or facade that lets you make quick changes in reaction to security events. So if there's a bug in a library or something that's very slow and scary to change as a vulnerability and you're under attack, you can make a fix right away. These are some scenarios where you need to quickly mitigate a problem. They are well known today, and hopefully they don't happen to you that often today. But with more sophisticated attacks driven by Gen AI empowered attackers, I expect you can see these accelerating. And then what are you going to do? Like it's 2 a.m. and you're getting one of these attacks. You need to mitigate the problem immediately. And at the API management layer is a perfect spot to do this, where you can filter, block, sanitize inputs. There's a lot of options for fast response here. And then finally, we have the option to buy expertise, to buy someone else's investment. This is a cat and mouse game in the security space. There is permanent investment needed. So you have to consider if it's your core mission to do this, and if it's where you want to spend your engineering hours and your dollars and your risk for each service. And I want to highlight like the level of investment that's required to build a good API security solution for even one of those scenarios that I described earlier. Google public APIs like Maps and YouTube are being targeted all the time by quite complex and sophisticated attacks. And we've developed for years internal technology that uses machine learning models to prevent attacks on these public APIs. This is a very big investment. Now, this investment lands in Apigee to provide the same level of security. We're able to apply those same models that we use based on these largest attacks across the internet and keep up to date to track what's happening in your system. We can then help you monitor what's happening in your API space, identifying patterns, sometimes taking action automatically, and sometimes identifying things for you to take action on. And finally, when you do need to take action, it's very easy for you to mitigate problems, block and filter traffic in the API proxy space. Based on these tools, Apigee can help keep an eye on when your APIs are misconfigured, which is a common source of security risks, or experiencing active abuse, and we can make recommendations on security postures and changes to make quickly. And finally, the bot and abuse detection itself is monitored, and you have dashboards that are raising the most important tasks, the biggest risks that we see happening, to help guide you on which actions to take. So to wrap up, with generative AI, a very exciting wave of creativity and new opportunities coming, as well as some challenges we need to be ready for. Think about how these machine-to-machine APIs will be operating. Really recommend that an API management that's integrated in with your whole flow and system is going to be really important to manage this, as well as escape hatches and leveraging other people's investments when you can. Thank you so much for listening. I love to hear feedback, and I hope to see you at a future API Days.